Alright, in this video demonstration I'm going to demonstrate how to route or set up routing between VLANs. Notice how I have my tabs set up for my SCVMM and server A, B, C, and core and Windows 7. I'm going to start off on server A, and we need to install the routing and remote access services role. So I'm going to click on the server manager down here just to the right of the start button, which will open up my server manager console. Alright, now that I'm in Server Manager, I'm going to click on Roles, and then I'm going to click Add Roles, and then I'm going to choose the Network Policy and Access Services. Again, we might think, hey, where is the Routing and Remote Access Services? It's actually contained as a subset of items under Network Policy and Access Services. And say Next, Next again. Then I'm going to choose the checkbox for Routing and Remote Access Services, Next, and finally do the Install. Alright, now that role has been installed, I'll click Close, close out of Server Manager, and now I can go to Start, Administrative Tools, and choose Routing and Remote Access Services. Now, just because we install the Routing and Remote Access Services role doesn't mean that it's actually set up and running and ready for us to do anything with it. It's actually installed, but it's disabled by default. So we're going to right-click on the server name and say Configure and Enable Routing and Remote Access Services. So start a little wizard for us, and we're actually going to set up server A as a NAT box, NAT router. Say Next. It's going to ask us for the public interface, and that was going to be the interface called To the Internet that I've labeled it, and the private interface we're going to share is the one to server B. Say Next, Finish. Alright, now that I have Routing and Remote Access Services enabled as a NAT, I want to go ahead and install RIP v2 on server A. So I'm going to go to General, right click, say New Routing Protocol, and I'm going to add RIP version 2. And then once RIP has been installed, it really doesn't mean anything unless the interfaces have been added. So I'm going to right click on RIP and say New Interface. And we're going to do the interface to server B. Remember, routing information protocol and other routing protocols in general are communicating back and forth between routers, and so we don't want to share information with anybody out on the internet just going to server B. So that's why we're going to choose the server B interface and say OK. Say OK to accept the defaults. Now we're going to move over to server B. So I'm going to close out of my windows here on A, and now I'm on server B. And same process. Now I did go ahead and I've already installed the role of routing remote access just like we did on server A on server B to kind of save some time. So now I'm going to right click on routing remote access, snap in server name, configure and enable routing remote access, say Next. This time we're not going to do NAT, we're just going to do a custom configuration because we just want to do LAN routing on server B. So we'll say Next, Finish, and then we do want to start the service. Take it just a moment to start up here. So again, just because I have the service enabled doesn't mean that everything is configured as it needs to be. We do have the green up arrow, which is a good sign. We're going to go to IPv4, and we're going to again install RIP on the appropriate interfaces. So we're going to say New Routing Protocol after we click on General, select RIP v2. Then we're going to install RIP on both interfaces. Now we can't do this two at a time. We can only select one interface at a time. And so we do have a router on server A, so we want to communicate with it. We also have a router on server C that we want to communicate with. So we're going to put RIP on both of these interfaces. So again, right click on RIP, and we're also going to add it to the server C interface. So we've got a routing set up now on server B. Let's move on to server C. Again, I've already, to save time, installed routing and remote access capability on server C. So I'm going to right click on server C server name, do configure and enable routing and remote access. Next, custom configuration. Next, LAN routing. Next, Finish, start service. Now in server C, we're only going to communicate with server B and exchange information with that router, so we don't need to put RIP on both interfaces, just on the interface going back up to server B. So again, I'm going to go back under IPv4 node, right click on General, New Routing Protocol, RIP v2, right click on the interface, right click on RIP and select New Interface. And again, we're just going to do the 1-2 server B. Server D and 7 are not going to be routers, and 7 obviously can't be a router, but D as a core box is not going to be a router at this time, so we're just going to put the interface for RIP on B and say OK. Now we should have our routing set up on A, B, and C. Close this out. Now we can double check it by going, and on Windows 7 we're going to go ahead and open up a command prompt, and let's try to ping all the way up to server A. So we see we do get a reply from .33, and again I could even do a trace route to the same IP address and watch as it hops through server A, then also server B, or excuse me, through server C, through to B, and then also finally ending up at A. If you're having trouble pinging all the way through, be careful to check for your firewalls. Okay, firewalls are on by default, and they can be a major showstopper when it comes to doing things like pinging and checking to see if communications are working amongst your intranet. So be careful about firewalls.